Hi everyone, Ted Wyman here with another edition of Jet Sitting, where we talk about all things Winnipeg Jets at winnipegsun.com. And today I'm joined by Winnipeg Sun hockey writer Scott Billeck. The Jets are coming off a very impressive 4-0 win over the St. Louis Blues on Monday night. In my column today, I described it as the St. Louis blueprint because the Jets seem to play so well against that team. And if they could just harness it all and do it against everybody else, they'd be a heck of a team. Wouldn't you agree, Scott?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like what Connor Hellebuyck said last night too, right? Like this is the way that they need to play. They showed it. It's now the benchmark, right? I mean, they were good in all three phases of the game, or all three zones in the game. They were good on the penalty kill. They were good on the power play. They were good at 5-on-5. Their big dogs were going. The Scheifele line was tremendous, but they also got that secondary scoring, right? Morgan Barron gets his first of the season after plenty of chances. And then Connor Hellebuyck stands on his head, makes 25 saves, first shutout of the year, fourth career against the Blues, and his 29th all time so far during his career. That's the way you draw it up. Rick Bowness wasn't there, had some troubles, had some medical issues, post COVID still. But there would have been a smile on his face last night because that's exactly how he wants the team to play heading into into the season. And they hadn't seen it yet, right? There had been stretches where they played well, but a period would here or there would cost them games. Last night was the way it needs to be heading into this road trip, which you were on 3 games and 4 nights again, same as their last previous road trip. That starts in LA on Thursday. And Ted, what do you see from this road trip coming up? It's maybe not the gauntlet that it was in the last one against Dallas, Denver, or Colorado and Vegas. LA, Arizona, and Vegas again on this road trip. But do you think that the Jets can kind of build off of what they had, basically on Monday night, and can they take that forward?
Well, that's really the big question, Scott. I mean, that's what we haven't seen from this team. You can play one great game, but
Yeah.
if you can't play 4 out of 5 great games, you're probably not going to be that successful in the NHL. So, I mean, they go through their first 5 games of the season and it's kind of middling. They had some pretty decent games. They played well in Colorado. They won in overtime there. That's not an easy thing to do.
Yeah.
They beat a really good New York Rangers team. But then they have games where you're not all that impressed at all, the way they played against Vegas, the way they played against Toronto. So, you just have to wonder what's going to be next. I will say that I do feel, even though it's very early in the season, getting to 500 with that win against St. Louis was pretty valuable because you go into this trip with a different kind of an attitude. If you're sitting at 2-4 going into that trip, it's kind of, boy, this thing could get away from you in a hurry. But
Yep.
There's a lot of opportunity to win on this trip with the teams that they're playing. It's not like they're pushovers. The Los Angeles Kings play very well against the Jets always. And, I think that's not going to be an easy game. That's difficult travel for the team when you're crossing 2 time zones. In fact, they have to cross back and forth through time zones throughout that trip in 3 games and 4 nights. And so, you wonder just how easy it might be to get through something like that. But we saw signs last night that there are a lot of aspects of the Jets that can be very good. And when that Mark Scheifele line is playing the way that it did last night, I don't know how many teams can contain them because Connor's like the wind and can make plays in a phone booth. You've got Mark Scheifele, who's playing really well, like 2017, 2018 Mark Scheifele, scoring very nicely. And there's that real dogged forechecking aspect that Mason Appleton brings to that line with Nikolai Ehlers out. So if those guys can keep playing with that kind of offensive power, and believe me, it makes them a better defensive line because they're controlling the puck in the offensive zone all the time. Yeah. They're going to be a pretty tough team to beat on these games on the road.
I agree, and I think the side that doesn't get talked about maybe enough this season is that defensive side. And I know you talked about, if you play in the offensive zone, that's the best defense that you can play, obviously. But I think we've seen a really good commitment from Mark Scheifele, especially. It's kind of a running joke that we've had early in the season is, Mark Scheifele might be up for a Selke this year. But, to be fair to Mark Scheifele, he's really turned around. You can see the buy-in from Mark Scheifele on the ice in all three zones. And it's not like, I mean, Mark Scheifele is playing deep in the defensive zone this year. It's not something that you normally would see. His shift times, they're down slightly. I mean, there's still times where Mark is on the ice for longer. I understand it. I mean, I get it. The guy's trying to make plays, but he's kind of bought into that too, where, he doesn't feel like he always has to do it. I think the biggest, one of the biggest questions that right now for the Jets is, where's Kyle Connor scoring from? He's got one empty netter. But, the thing with that too is, and this was an old kind of, this is more of an old cliche in sports, and Paul Maurice liked to use it quite a bit. You'd be worried if he wasn't getting the chances, right? But he's still getting the chances. He's just getting stoned. He had one off the crossbar last night. He's had plenty of chances. They're just not going in. But like I said earlier, I mean, I think this team is well equipped defensively because there are there are four lines right now that can play defense on this team. And one of the biggest things was, is this team going to be able to score? Is it getting that secondary scoring? It was a little kind of dormant on the road trip where they went 1 for 3 in those games. But you saw it again last night on Monday night against the Blues, where Morgan Barron scores and Sam Gagner gets another goal. I mean, we don't talk about Sam Gagner enough. Might be one of the best veteran signings this team has ever made. Early in the season. I mean, it's early, right? We'll see how it goes, but there's an offensive upside to Sam Gagner. How often have we ever seen a fourth liner playing on the power play in Winnipeg? They were usually only reserved to penalty killing roles under Paul Maurice and his coaching regime. So, I think you're seeing a different team here that's still a little bit stuck in transition. Not even stuck. They're just in that transition mode. But that the good that Rick Bowness has instilled in this team is evident. Like you see what they're trying to do, and when they do it well. And I think Scott O'Neill said this on the road trip in the last game. When this team is doing that well, they're really doing it well, and it's really good. And we saw that against St. Louis, and that's the type of thing that you want to see kind of going forward. But as you alluded to, I mean, you want to see the consistency. You want to see that continuity from game to game to game. And I guess that's the next test for the Jets, right? Can they build off of this St. Louis Blues game and put it to the same kind of, put themselves in the same position when they face off against the Los Angeles Kings on Thursday night?
Yeah, what impressed me about the game against St. Louis was that I thought the defense played very well. I thought Josh Morrissey had a, elite level game. Obviously, yep. Connor Hellebuyck didn't give up a goal. That's a pretty elite level game. And Mark Scheifele and Kyle Connor both played elite level games. I think when your best players at every position are doing that, you're going to be in good shape. And we're not talking about coming in and doing that against an also ran in the league. The St. Louis Blues came in undefeated. They were a playoff team by a long shot last year. It's not that long ago that they won the Stanley Cup, and they have a pretty similar core. So that's a great win for the Jets. The weird thing is, of course, that the Jets did that to St. Louis all of last year as well, when they were, and the Jets were not a playoff team. There's something about the way they match up against St. Louis that works real well, which is why, I kind of think they'd like to be able to harness that and be able to use it going forward against all these other teams, but it doesn't necessarily work that way, obviously. The areas where I think there's still some concern, obviously, is the fact that power play has not been done much. They're 2 for 19 or something like that. It's about 10%, and that's just not good enough. Now, they did get chances in the game against St. Louis, and Scott Arniel, who was filling in for Rick Bowness, talked about it and said, this is that was a pretty good power play. We moved the puck around well. We got good chances, as you said. There was a crossbar by Connor, a post by Pierre-Luc Dubois. The chances were there, and Connor, believe me, I mean, you can tell that he really is wanting to get a goal, and he was working as hard as he possibly could to do it in that game. I think he had 7 or 8 shots on net, well over 10 shot attempts. I mean, a guy is doing something right when he's generating like that. And plus, he made some great plays. Didn't get an assist on the Scheifele goal, but he had a big role in it. And then he did get the assist on the Sam Gagner goal. So it's not like you have to worry too much about him. I'll say this, you talk about that secondary scoring being helpful when Sam Gagner, certainly with 3 goals, and Morgan Barron getting a goal last night, plus a few goals from the defense. That's pretty helpful. But the truth is, they do not have a goal yet, from Kyle Connor other than an empty netter, and they
Yep.
don't have anything from Nikolai Ehlers, who's been injured, and
Yep.
those are two of your three top scorers. So it's not terrible to be sitting where they're at, considering they haven't got as much from those guys as they would have expected. So I'm interested, Scott, to hear your take on just summing up this first 6 games. What has really stood out for you, and what do you think needs to be worked on the most for the Jets to take this a little bit further above 500 rather than being sort of that middling team?
Yeah, I mean, two things. One, the buy-ins there, and you see it on a consistent basis. And, I think that's maybe the biggest thing that the Jets needed this year was you need that buy-in. You need players doing it. And I guess this kind of dovetails into my second thing, is that the Jets aren't going through their adversity and carrying it from game to game. When something bad happens to the Jets in the game, and they used to kind of just sink, and they would, they'd just be drowning in the rest of the game. They wouldn't get it back until the next game or the game after that. And it always kind of snowballed into this kind of, they'd lose 2 or maybe even 3 straight before they could kind of right the ship. I think what you're seeing, I mean, if you even go back to the Vegas game at the tail end of that trip, they had a really bad first period, giving up 4 goals, the way that they gave up those goals. It was a bad period. But they regrouped in the second half of that game was on the second half of a back-to-back and an emotional 4-3 overtime win against the Colorado Avalanche the night before. And they come out in that second period in Vegas, and they basically, if the Jets would have played 2 periods and that's how that game would have went, they would have won that game. And so they're doing it this year differently than they have in the past. 1 goal, even 4 goals doesn't sink this team. They're going out there, and they if they have a bad period or a bad stretch, they're able to flush that a lot quicker now, and it's happening in game. And I think that's a big thing for a team that's, I think you almost know what this team's identity is, even though they don't really say it yet. But every time they're on there, they're going to work hard, and they're going to try and find a way to win, and they're going to be able to flush things quickly. And if it goes really well, you see what you got on Monday night in that Blues game. So I think there's already kind of this established identity in this team that doesn't really have to be spoken, because you see it on the ice. And this team just doesn't wilt away the same way that it used to. And so, yeah, we're through 6 games. It's like, it's not even 10% of the schedule, I don't think, just yet. But you're seeing things early on in this year, and Rick Bowness has been behind the bench for 1 of those 6 games so far. But you can already see Rick Bowness's fingerprints on this team and the way that they're playing. And I think that's one of the biggest things that I'm taking away out of 6 games. Yeah, 500, 3-3-0, that there's, whatever. I mean, I think a lot of people would have said, if you're 500 through these first 6 games as the Jets, being a non-playoff team last year, having to play the Stanley Cup, defending Stanley Cup champs, the Blues, Vegas, Dallas, and New York Rangers who went to the conference finals. I mean, those are teams that you probably 3-3-3 looks pretty good, all things considered. But yeah, it's the little things in this team that you're seeing that are so much different than they were under Paul Maurice or even Dave Lowry. And through 6 games, that's what I'm seeing as a team that's all pulling in the right direction, or at least in the same direction. And going forward, that's kind of that's a good thing for this team coming off such a poor year from last year.
Yeah, great analysis, Scott. And obviously, you can tell that there has been some kind of impact made by Rick Bowness and his coaching staff. Scott Arniel, you got to give the guy a lot of credit. He's got a lot of familiarity, obviously, with Winnipeg and with True North, and he's come in and done a real nice job as well. So, it's not a ton, but you can see that impact, and that's obviously very important. Scott, appreciate it very much. Great conversation today about the Jets. We'll be back for more Jet setting next week. For Post Media, I'm Ted Wyman. He's Scott Billeck, and you've been watching Jet Setting.